So now that we have built all of our templates for all of our different categories of case studies, we can actually start working on our case studies page. So this is where we're going to showcase all of the case studies regardless of category, and we can just add a little bit more about us, about why we're special and unique, etc, etc. And again, just another great space to showcase our skills as WordPress developers, right? So we can really showcase some of the best little tips and tricks and quirks and real interesting design, so that visitors to this website are going to be wowed by it all and obviously want to work with us. So let's get on with that now. And just quickly, just so that you guys know, I have come back to the top editor. So under the features, under the Elementor settings, we are working with the editor top bar again. I've activated that just so that you guys can see both in use. So the classic interface and the editor top bar interface. Now I do believe this will be the only default option in future. I do think that this will be made the default. So it's good to work with this now, as it's still just an experiment. So let's carry on with this now. So we now want to edit our our case studies page. So if we come to all pages here, we've already created that page because we have this in our header. So now we just want to edit this, and then we're going to edit this with Elementor. So now we can let our creative juices flow. So how do we want this page to look? Now, if I'm being totally honest at this point, I generally keep all of the design elements across the website to be uniform and similar, because it's all on brand, it's all on design, and it's all very familiar as visitors browse our websites. But what I am going to be doing for this course, for this website in particular, is I'm going to be mixing up the designs here so that you guys get to see basically how my brain works as one thing, but also how we can use a lot of the different design elements and stuff to create these real unique websites, these real unique pages. And then you can just take what you like from them and apply them to your own website. But like I said, keep them designs uniform for single build websites. As an example, for the case studies page here, what I might do if we come back to the website is, if we was to come back to the home page, might come back to the home page here. I might save the hero here as a template. So what we have here with the curved bottom, we have the background gradient. We could come along, save this whole container here when it wants to let me click it. And it won't let me for whatever reason. We can come to that hero, we can save that as a template, and then we can basically reuse this on our case studies page, on our about us page, or anything else, right? So that is what I would normally do. But like I said, we want to mix things up, so I expose you to as many different design elements and design quirks as possible, and you can take all of the best bits away and apply them to your own websites, whether they are your own websites or if you're going to start building your websites for clients. So let's get to this now. So what I am thinking is, for our hero for this page, is we're just going to come along and create a container with a horizontal flow, and then we're going to drag in 2 new containers into this one. So one container, and then I'm going to duplicate that. And now what I want to do is add a background image to the top level container. So the top level one here. So let's come along to style, let's come along to classic background type, and then select image. Now I'm going to use this image here. This is going to be attached as a file, as a resource for this lesson. So go ahead and download that, and we can work with this one. And it's fair to say at this point, guys, that I am not optimizing these images, right? So if you're ever building a website for yourself or for a client, do make sure that you're using a website like TinyPNG, where you just drag them in so it compresses them and optimizes them for the web. If you're using something like Photoshop, you can save for web, where it's going to again save a compressed version of that image. Just make sure that you're doing that. I'm not going to be doing that throughout this course, throughout this lesson, throughout this website, because I don't want to waste your time, my time doing this, because this is something that you should be doing anyway. Now, of course, you might have a image compression plugin, something like what is the one that I used to use? I can't remember, but I used one called it's made by the same guys as WP Rocket, and it's really, really fantastic at optimizing images. If you're doing that as well, then you may not need to use something like TinyPNG. But just so you know, so that you are mindful when you're building a website that you are compressing. And of course using your alt text, which we are not wasting time putting in as well. So let's carry on. Let's go ahead and add this image as a background. So I'm going to select that. And then down below, I'm going to change that position to center, and the display size to cover so that it looks like that. Now I'm also going to add a background overlay. So we're going to select background overlay, a classic background type. We could go with a white. In fact, I'm going to go with a black. So we're going to make that a bit darker. And I'm going to maybe make that opacity a 0.6. Like that, or maybe a 0.55. Why not? We'll go in the middle. So that is the background image taken care of. Now we want to give the container a height. So let's give this a min height. I'm thinking maybe 500. That looks pretty good. And now what we want to do is we want to add like some sort of breadcrumbs over here so that our visitors can navigate back to our homepage. So we can create something like that for ourselves. Let's go ahead and do that now. In fact, I've just noticed we've got our title here, so we can actually delete that first. So let's come back to our not site settings. Let's come back to, let me get back there and close that off. Let's come back to the page settings. So page settings under here. Where is the page settings? Over here, sorry, page settings. Flicking between all of these different interfaces, I forget where certain things are. So let's come along to our hide title, and we can select that as yes, so we don't have our title on this page. So now that's done, we can get back to our containers. So what we want to do is add some sort of breadcrumb in this second container. So let's come along to add element. Now we could use something like an icon list. So where is the icon list? I'm going to search icon list. We could drag something like that in. Now you can see how that looks at the minute. Let's just make that white so that we can see it. Now you guys don't need to follow along here. This is more just so that you can see. Let's make that white. Make the icon white. Now we could make our own breadcrumbs by doing something like removing that icon for the first item. We could say home here. We could then under the second item delete the text. We can change that icon to a chevron, something like that. Let's insert that. And then the second link item, we could make this our case studies, right? So case studies, we can remove that icon. We can make this in line so that it looks like that. And then we have what looks like a breadcrumbs, right? So we have the breadcrumbs for our visitors to easily navigate. Now, of course, you can edit the space in between them and everything else. You would want to add a link back to your home. So you'd add a link here to your home page. And then you've got a good looking breadcrumb. That would be one way to add your breadcrumbs. You could just use a button to go back home, or we can use a heading to go back home. And in fact, I'm going to use a heading here. So let's drag a heading into there. And then the heading here, I'm going to say go back home. And then here we will just use our home page as the link. So I would just copy that, paste that in so that it looks like that. I would make this maybe a H5 or even a span or a div. I would make that actually, let's keep that as a H5 or 6. Or H6 was an okay size. Now we can come to the styling of that. So let's change that text color to maybe a white. So let's make that white. In fact, we could make that a bit of an off-center primary pinky color, right? So something like that. So it has a bit of color to it. That would be okay. Typography, let's change that to, should we go with primary? I'm going to go with primary for this one. Primary, I'm going to reduce the size of that to maybe 0.8 so that it looks like that. I'm going to go ahead and delete that icon list. We don't need that. And what I'm going to do for the container that sits in, I'm actually going to change that to justify content end. So it's sitting down there like that. So that is looking okay. Now what I want to do is I'm going to actually edit the widths of these containers. Now I don't think that is something that we've covered so far yet. At the minute we've only been using the size, so we can grow or shrink, so that it shrinks and grows depending on the space that we want to give it as a ratio of that parent container. So we're actually going to give these containers a specified width here. So to do that, let's come along to the first container, and we can change the content width here to full width. And then we can change the width of that container. So I'm thinking maybe 70% for the first, and then 30% for the second container. So let's come to full width for this one. Let's now make this 30% so that it looks something like that. So that is looking good. I'm happy with that. And what we want to do now is I'm going to add a new section just below that. So I'm going to select add a container. I'm going to go with horizontal flow. Let's go ahead and drag another 2 containers in there. I'm going to drag one in, and then I'm going to duplicate that. And just like what we did with the containers up the top, we want to set them exact same widths to these 2 as well. So let's set this first container. Let's change that to full width and then 70. And then the second container, let's change to full width and 30. In fact, I don't even think we'll need this second container, but we'll keep it there for now anyway. And now this container here on the left hand side, we're going to give this a background color. So let's come along now to classic. Let's maybe make that white. And then we want to add some negative margin to the top. So back over to advanced, and then we're going to uncheck the link values together. And then let's start adding some negative margin. So I'm going to go with, let's go with something, let's add a 100 there. Something like 120 I think is okay. 120 is looking good. And then what we want to do is drag in a heading. So let's come back to add element, and now we can give this section a heading. So what do we want to add in here? Now again, this text is going to be rather nonsensical. It doesn't have to be. This is just dummy content at the end of the day. Let's go with we believe in the power of, or we believe in the true power of beautiful design for everyone. Now, of course, I would never have that on a website of my own. I mean, of course, that needs to be relevant for your website, but it's just some dummy content at the end of the day, so that's fine. I'm going to leave that as the H2 because when we do use case studies as a heading, I'm going to add that as a H1 because that is going to be better for SEO. So let's now come along to the styling of this. So let's come to style. Let's give this a text color of accent. And then let's change the typography to primary. I'm actually going to make that a bit bigger. I might make that maybe 2.2. Oh, 2.2. Or maybe even 2.5. 2.5 is okay. No, 2.3. I might make this 500. And then I might... No, actually, I'm going to keep that as 600. What we do need to do is then amend this line height because it's too tight together. Let's go with something like a 2.5 or a 2.6. That is okay. And then we want to add some padding around that container. So let's do that now. Or in fact, what I will do, I'm actually going to make this all capitalized so that the first letter is all capitalized. Now let's add some padding, so some additional padding to this container that it is in. So I'm going to keep the link values checked, and then we can start increasing that. So let's go with maybe something like 30 or 35 even. That looks okay. And then I am in fact going to delete this container now because it is kind of redundant. And then it's going to look something like that. So it's kind of breaking over that image that we've got within our hero, and that looks pretty cool. You may want to change the color of that go back home. Of course, that doesn't look very bright and easy to see on that image, but of course that's going to be relevant to your website, and it doesn't really make a difference for this dummy content. So what else can we do to jazz this up? So in fact, we could actually add a shape divider to this top hero. So this top level container, let's come along to style. Let's come along to shape divider and then select bottom. Let's stick with the waves. I do like the waves a lot. A lot of the other ones I really don't like. You've got stuff like the clouds, which I think don't look good. Drops looks awful. So I'm just going to stick with the waves. Now, of course, I want to edit this. So let's change the height of that first because it's way too high. so that it looks something like that. Let's change that width so that maybe it looks something like that. I'm happy with that. We could in fact change that height and bring that up a bit more so that it looks something like that. So that looks okay. I'm happy with that. I'm going to add a little bit of padding to this go back home now. In fact, I might just make that a bit bigger whilst we're here. So let's make that 1. Let's now come to advanced. Let's add some padding to the bottom just to bring that up a bit. And let's add some to the left there as well. Oh, not negative. So that it looks like that. And that is looking okay. So I'm happy with that. So that's going to bring this lesson to an end. And in the next lesson, we'll just carry on building this case studies page.